I will never forget one time I was in service. I was living in Middle Tennessee, and it was 4 sisters in the car group, and the driver of the car group was one of the elders' wives. And there was another sister in the car group who was a little older, and she was just she just had a very blunt personality. She was very matter of fact about everything, not really afraid to speak her mind. And I love that about her. But the elder's wife was talking about ministry and how it was just, so fulfilling. And oh, doesn't it just recharge your battery and, like just make you feel so wonderful? And in my mind, of course, I was thinking, not really. I'm hot. I'm tired. I worked all week. Like, no one wants these magazines. No one wants to talk to me. I don't feel that way. But of course, I would never dare breathe a word of that. And this older sister, out of nowhere, she just chimed in. She said, I hate it. Crickets, dead silence. And the elder's wife kind of gave a nervous laugh and she said, hate it? And the sister said, I hate it. She said, I hate talking to strangers. I hate trying to like convince someone of something that they're not interested in. I hate approaching a stranger's door. I hate going on a stranger's property. Like I hate all of it. And we didn't even know what to say. And she said, I do it because number one, I feel like it pleases the Lord. But then number two, that's the rules. I don't have a choice. I don't have a say in the matter. So I just do it. She said, but if you're asking my opinion, I hate it. And I didn't say anything, but inside I was like, oh yeah, tell her. I was cheering her on from the inside. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Difficult Childhood. My name is Falon. And as always, I am joined by my lifelong friend and amazing co-host, Jason. Hey, buddy.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm great. This week, we decided to take a little bit of a break from the heavy hitting topics. Our last few videos have just discussed like some more serious things with a lot of emotion attached to them. So this week, we thought it would be nice to just take a little step away and discuss something slightly more lighthearted, or at least something that hopefully you can find humor in a little bit. We're talking about why life inside the organization is extremely difficult if you are an introverted person.
Yeah, and I agree. We have skewed a little bit murdery, but don't worry, we have more murder to come. No, we do, but yeah, unfortunately. The Before we got started on this, though, we wanted to share something that we were noticing the numbers that are something that's kind of unique to former Jehovah's Witness podcasts, as well as like former ex-Mormon stuff like that, where there will be a much larger view count on a video than there are subscriptions.
Right.
And like you look at a lot of, there's one podcast I love, Diary of a CEO. It is, they have 6 million subscribers and they will get on average 1 to 3 million views. That's obviously a much bigger scale, but it's pretty consistent. Usually you get about half the views of the amount of subscribers that you have. Well, that goes opposite, like I said, with XJW, ex-Mormon, that type of thing. And you're probably ahead of me on this one. It took me a minute. I realized that, oh, it's because there are a lot of people that don't subscribe because subscribing can be public. Your family can see who you subscribe to. And we just wanted to maybe restate that we are always like, hey, please subscribe if you can. No pressure from us on that end, because it is already a very hard thing that you're doing by watching content that is really coming from the other side, sort of.
Right.
We were in that same position ourselves. We knew how difficult it was. And even I remember you telling me, Fallon, something about you were just like super scared to just click on something that was at
Terrified.
all critical.
Terrified.
Right. And I felt the same way. And then I had to justify, oh, I was just doing all this stuff I had to work through. But that's okay. I mean, like, for example, one of our videos, we had 17 times the views as our number of subscribers. So I guess the point is, this is a safe place for that. And the fact that you're already thinking about it and open to it, if Jehovah's Witnesses have the truth, they will be able to withstand any scrutiny. It's not poison. That's not how thoughts work. It's like the governing body says, If they do have the truth, your faith will just become stronger by looking at the other arguments, because then you'll be able to take them apart. So,
Right.
yeah, you guys for being here. We appreciate it, and no pressure to subscribe.
Yeah, we always invite you to, but there's no pressure. I've heard several people say, "Oh, I wanted to leave a comment or, I wanted to like interact with the video," but maybe your username is your actual name and you don't want your actual name out there because you're not ready to be identified as someone that is questioning things, or maybe someone that's physically in but mentally out, and that's perfectly fine. Our email address is in the video description. So if there is a comment or a question that you want to ask, that you want to reach us, you can always email us. Nobody looks at that email except you and I. So we don't ever discuss or share anybody's name with anyone but each other unless that is specifically a permission that you give us. So we don't ever disclose anybody's identity. So you don't have to worry about that.
Absolutely. But back to today, you really organized this beautifully. These this 5 things that make being an introvert. Of course, an introvert being someone who has to expend energy to be with people. It costs you to be out and be social, and you find being at home and being maybe just with your family or with yourself to be recharging. And I
Right.
certainly count myself among those people. As loud as I am, I'm definitely very much, I get my energy from going back home.
You're pretty loud. I'm not going to lie about that. And
Yeah.
so the first thing, number 5, the organization expects your social tank to be on full all the time. And you're operating within like a very small circle of peers. You're the people that you have in your congregation are everything. That's who you not only worship with, but that's who you hang out with on the weekend. If you're a kid in public school, that's the only public school peer that you're going to associate with. At least for us, it was. We only hung out pretty much with each other. Maybe there was a few exceptions, but overall, we always sat together on the bus. If we were at recess at the same time, we just buddied up. That's the only person that you're told is like safe to hang
Right.
out with. But that can easily burn you out when it's just the same people over and over again. What do you think?
Oh, for sure. I posted this up on, maybe we'll sprinkle these throughout the today, up on Reddit, and I
Mhm.
asked the question, "Are you introverted? What was being a JW like for you?" And I got some responses. The
Yeah.
one that really matches this section is, he said, "I think what I hated most as an introvert was the added social engagements. Well, geez, I've seen these these people 4 times this week, 3 meetings, and serve us, phonetically spelled. And but now they want me to hang with them on Saturday night too. JFC." he he's exhausted, and he goes on to mention it is exhausting to just have to do so much. You've got, and back then it was 3 separate meetings,
Hmm.
including book study and service, which is usually twice a week. So then you're at 5 things, and then they want usually a minimum of 1 social thing. You're at 6 nights a week,
Yeah.
or days, events a week, excuse me. What is that? That's not sustainable.
Well, and if you express that that's maybe not for you, then the first question is something wrong? Did someone hurt your feelings? Are you offended? Like, were you offended by someone else in the congregation? And there's not really an option to just say, no, that's just not for me. um,
No,
there's like
not a bit.
this notion that, well, something must be wrong. Maybe you're not being upfront about it, but something's wrong if you're not on board with all that.
Mhm.
But the other reason I think that it's a shame is because there's not a lot of diversity in personality within the organization. I'm not saying everyone is identical, but as far as like, what you're interested in, how you spend your time,
Mhm.
most JWs are very similar. So because there's not a lot of like diversity in people's character, I feel like you miss out on a lot of opportunities to learn from other people.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I was, just this morning, we're recording this on June 30th, Sunday. Just this morning, I was next door with my neighbors this older couple who were setting up their they treat Fourth of July like Christmas. It's real cute. And so I was helping them, they're helping me, and it was nice. But I that was such an exchange with people who have totally different views,
Mhm.
spiritually, socially, just everything's so different. So it's such an enriching experience to interact with people like that. And you don't get that in the congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses at all.
Yeah, they use the analogy that iron sharpens iron, that you have to interact with people that are differing, or, almost like a little bit of friction to keep yourself sharp. But there's no iron. That's no, no. This is
That analogy is about as advanced as the Iron Age. It's
less
ridiculous.
100%. 100%. You take the next one.
Well, it was about we're talking about the next one was about assemblies and conventions and how draining they were. I remember you'd have all this hubbub the day before the convention. Then we had 3 and 4 day conventions. And back when our parents were kids, those poor souls, they had like 8 day conventions. But we had 3 and 4 day conventions, and you just go, and there was a constant, like from 7 a.m. I'd start my 7:30 maybe. I'd start my first assignment and maybe in parking or something, being attendant somewhere, and you would just rush through the entire day, and then in the evening you're supposed to go out to dinner with people that are your friends, and that part is kind of nice. But it was just such a non-stop barrage that I found myself having to find in each convention center a little place to retreat.
Oh, yeah.
And someone else on Reddit mentioned this too, that they would do that with the conventions, and I thought, yes, I did. I would go, and there was this one in the Tucson Convention Center. This won't apply to many people, so I won't go into much detail. But there was a main hall, the convention center hall, where we did the conventions, and then before they had their assembly hall in Casa Grande, there was a smaller room. And in that smaller room behind the stage, there was a little elevator that went up to one level where they would do the accounting for, not accounting, the counting for all the boxes they'd bring in from the convention, and all the donations. And it looked like the movie Casino, where Joe Pesci's in the back room and they're dumping all the money out and they're
Yeah,
counting it out and they're trying to be fast, and everybody's watching the counters. But when they left, that was a quiet little lounge. And I would go back there where it was quiet as can be. And it was so relaxing. And I just sit there. And this is like mid 2000s. So I had a flip phone. It was just serenity. There wasn't any, a smartphone or anything. I was just serenity chilling back there. And the same thing when we moved to Portland in 2010. I immediately went to work to find out where's the secret spot, and there it was up behind the stage. There was a spot where they'd have it was for if it was a performer or talent, then they would
yeah, of
have a lounge to go to up there. But it's this little tiny staircase. I thought there's something up there, and I had my attendance badge. It's totally unfair because sisters couldn't get that,
course.
so I got my attendance badge and I just go up there, and oh, it's so quiet, so relaxing. I just spend an hour every day in those solitude places because
Mhm.
you just got to get away from it. What about you?
Well, I mean, I feel like I am a pretty social person, but even for a social person, those types of gatherings can be very overwhelming, very
Mhm.
overstimulated. You are surrounded by, you've gone from 100 people maybe at your local congregation to a few thousand people from all different areas, different states at the convention. So you're in an unfamiliar place. You're in like a big, like a civic center, some kind of arena. Um, Sounds are overwhelming, whether it's singing, talking, you're going to hear, hundreds of kids crying at any given moment at the same time. The PA system's blasting. There's always like a lot of feedback, and the microphones whining. So I definitely could see if you are someone that has to push yourself on a local level to keep that momentum up socially. I can definitely see why circuit assemblies or district conventions could maybe just be a little too much to handle all at once. I was at my local civic center just a couple of years ago. We had taken the kids there to watch a college basketball game, and during the break, like between periods, we were walking down the corridor, and I noticed that there was a room, and I can't remember exactly what it was called. I think it was called like a sensory room or something like that. And there was a little sign on the door, and it said, if you are visiting the Civic Center and you need a quiet space, if you have a child that's on like the autism spectrum, some kind of issue like
Sort
that,
of
if you're
neurodivergent situation.
overstimulated by sounds or lights or the
Hmm.
combination of both, that this room is, quiet. You can't hear anything in there. And it was a place for parents or adults, parents to take their kids to kind of just decompress, like to get a little break from that barrage of sensory input. And I thought that was great. I thought, man, where
Wow,
was
that is
that when
nice.
I was when I was at the convention, or other people that maybe needed it more? I thought that could have been so beneficial.
Oh man, yeah, absolutely. I don't get overwhelmed by that kind of stuff, but so I never really thought about that. I was in my own little other world, but
Yeah.
that's interesting. That must be. I mean, just when you sit down and it's all those lights and all the PA system, like you said, and he's like,
Oh, yeah.
"Welcome, brothers, to the 1997 Give God Glory Convention." It's echoing, and it was like, oh, and you just and I'm not neurodivergent that I know of, and so I'm just being in my seat, like, oh. And but you got to think that back then, when kids were like, oh, that kid's just a little out of hand, that they're really actually having um, a neurological experience, that that they're overwhelmed and they have a need that's not being satisfied. That's rough for a lot of kids.
Oh, yeah. And then parents wonder why it's so hard for them to, sit still and pay attention after 8 hours of that every day. So
Oh.
I
And then
feel,
back in the 60s, my mom would tell me that they had like the evening session too.
oh, yeah. My
There was
mom, when she
three
was a kid,
sessions.
she said it was a whole week. Like we were used to just 3 days. But she said when she was a kid, it was an entire week, all day, every day. I just can't imagine.
And what did you have to talk about? I mean, did Moses just come up with a whole bunch of new stuff every single
Things.
year that you had to really That's nuts. How much new stuff is coming out? Stop it, guys.
Well, none. I
Oh
mean,
gosh.
it's just a lot of repetition. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
number
All
three
right.
on our list is how the organization, they always claim that they want to prevent cliques from forming within the congregation. But I
Mhm.
feel like that's just a nice way of saying that they don't want to have their members, especially younger people, form like the deeper bonds, to forge like the deeper connections with their peers. Um, so they're gonna say
Right.
like, oh, don't be cliquish, don't isolate others. Yes, obviously use common sense. Don't be a bully. Don't ignore people. But you also recognize that there are going to be some people that you just naturally blend with better. Your personalities just mesh better.
Right.
And I'm reminded of an experience that I had at least twice. Now, these events weren't back to back, but I know of two specific times that this happened. You know how when you go to the meetings, everybody kind of just knows where certain people sit. There's not an
Yeah.
official seating chart, but everybody knows, oh, the Smith family always sits on the left in the middle, and the Jones family
Mhm.
always sits on the right in the corner or whatever. So
Jason and Rebecca were always 60% toward the back on the right side, 100% of the time.
every time. That's just your,
Mhm.
where you like set up shop.
Mhm.
Um, so I know of at least twice that the brother on the platform would give a talk about, not being in cliques. And basically, he was saying maybe you're only socializing with people that are in your like physical orbit, like around where you sit. Maybe you're not talking to brother so and so or sister so and so before or after the meeting because they don't sit close to you. So he said to avoid this, we need to, keep ourselves from getting like locked into a routine. So in the middle of the talk, he said, everybody get up, stand up, pick up your Bibles and your songbook, and everybody just scatter, like find a new seat. And everybody did. They gathered up all their stuff and their kids and their books, and everybody just kind of shuffled around the auditorium and found a different seat. It made me laugh because number one, you sit wherever you sit there because you like it. If you hated that seat, you wouldn't sit there. So nobody really wanted to find a new seat. And then number two, at the following meeting, everybody, of course, wanted to go back to their old seat, but you didn't want to be the first family to kind of throw off the instruction that you were just given. So then you had to stick with a new seat, and nobody liked that. But even though that's a silly experience, it to me just is another way that they were saying everybody just has to be spread thin. Like just you know,
Hmm.
don't buddy up. Don't
Make everything uniform.
don't bond. And then at another convention, and this is the point that I'm getting to, why they're afraid of those tighter bonds. At a convention, the brother on the stage said that they were cautioning young people, older teens, against forming these study groups with their friends. So apparently, there had been a couple of like older teen groups of friends that had started like a study group. And originally, they were just like preparing for the Watchtower study. But then, like, as time went on and they, got closer and they learned to trust each other more with ideas, they kind of started like a deeper study about like the history of the organization and why witnesses believe certain things and
Mm.
alternate translations of the Bible. Kind of, getting into like some
Ooh,
uncharted territory, which organization
risky.
feels is dangerous. And then they started sharing what they were learning with their parents. The parents panicked, immediately went to the elders, and the elders nixed that. So from the stage during the convention, they said, we appreciate that you have, friends that you want to delve into God's word with, but if you're not, basically they said, if you're not able to stay on track with the approved material, you either need an adult to like chaperone your study group, or you need to just disband the
Oh,
group altogether.
how ridiculous.
It was horrible.
Wow. Well, I mean, it just shows how, I mean, you can't have any additional studying because young people are who are learning to engage their critical thinking. Well, then just it's like the we were talking about this the Erickson stage of psychosocial development, and that's just it's an explanation of how people grow and develop.
Yeah,
And my therapist was telling me about that. And so when you're getting into that critical thinking and trying to use logic, you have these young adults trying to do this. Oh, we can't have that. We can't have that. We need to have the organization running the show because I mean, for example, you take a Jehovah's Witness teaching like that everyone in the new system will live forever. Okay, maybe, but also they'll have free will. Okay, but also that they won't. There won't be any death. So we know they'll have free will, but they'll never actually choose something that's away from Jehovah. It's all these different things that are really not biblical. I'm not bagging on the Bible here. They're different teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses that after you start digging around a little bit, you're like, wait a minute, there's a hole right there in your teaching, and
right.
you can't have those young people doing that. Um, and it also speaks to how you can't have just on a one-on-one. Like I wasn't doing any study groups at all. I was never that good, that holy. But my friend and I, Curtis, we were really close friends, and as we became a little more close, I'd be like, I don't really know. What do you think about that teaching of the organization? And I could ask him that. I can feel comfortable with
Right.
a back and forth there. Well, that's not at all acceptable for the organization because then you're going to be, starting to criticize the organization. So they want to keep everybody evenly friends, but everything is a very much a surface. Who was it here? Somebody said. Uh, I'm not seeing it right now, but something about how all your conversations are very, very small talk and surface. And wasn't that a
Superficial. Yeah.
lovely watchtower? Yeah,
Yeah, the
no deep
Erickson.
relationships.
Oh,
Sorry.
100%. The Erickson model that you were talking about, it's based on age. And the one that corresponds to like the teenage years, or the age group that most of the kids in that study group were at, is the identity and role confusion phase of development. So that's a time, in your development where you're learning who you are, where do you fit in
Hmm.
socially, where do you fit in this case, where do I fit into the organization, what's my role, who am I in, out in the world. And it, from their standpoint, definitely could be dangerous for multiple young people to start, like you said, engaging that critical thinking, saying, does this ring true for me, how do I fit into all this. So they definitely, I feel like, want to suppress that.
And it's just impossible to have a real meaningful friendship with 100 people. You can't do
Sure.
it. I'm reminded of Seinfeld. No thanks, I already have 3 friends.
My quota
That's
is
about
met.
the right. And you can't, so they want you to be friends with all 110 people in your congregation, and that is not, it's impossible. How are you going to do all that and the 6 events that you got to do every, with the organization, every week, and the well, at least that was back when we were kids, but still incredibly overwhelming, and have a job, and take care of your family, and do anything else. It's an impossible task, and all of these things just stack together to show that they're just trying to keep you busy with simple tasks, busy work, and nobody think that much.
Agreed.
Hmm. All right, number 2 in our top 5: commenting and participating at the meetings and giving talks and other things that make you feel nauseated.
Yeah. It was the now this is one area, even as like social as I am, that I hated. And I mean I hated it. When I was growing up, the expectation in our home was if the meeting had a question and answer portion or like a audience participation portion, you were expected to raise your hand, to participate as much as possible. My mom always said there's only two reasons you should not be raising your hand when the conductor asks a question. Either you don't know the answer, which she knew that wasn't the case because she always made us, like prepare, even as kids, like prepare
Mm,
in advance.
mm,
Either you don't know the answer or you don't want to answer. Well, that one definitely wasn't an option. You didn't have the option to not want to participate. So you were expected every question, get that hand up there. And I've
oh, really?
definitely gotten like
Yeah.
dirty looks or like pinched in the leg because I wasn't like, participating as much as I guess they thought I should.
Well,
But
that's
it's
why your
horrible
hand
for
was
a
up so
kid.
much more than me.
It's horrible for a kid. They put the
Yeah.
microphone right in your face. It's like blaring over the PA system, your little pre-rehearsed answer. It's just awful.
Hmm. I My parents weren't quite that intense about that, and I guess that is why your hand was flying up there so much. But mine were a little less. They were like, okay, 3 or 4 comments per watchtower, or that's good enough. But you have to have 3 or 4, and there generally was 3 or 4 successful comments. Not you raised your hand, that didn't really get you far unless you raised your hand 20 times and didn't get called on once. Or you're behind in a bad spot where the speaker, those were exceptions, but it was usually 3 or 4 per meeting, which wasn't too terrible. But it, it also was just funny how like my mom attached it to that she would be embarrassed if we didn't raise our hands because then it
Right.
looked like we weren't a spiritual family.
Again, it all
Your
goes
mom.
back to other people's perception. How does it look
Hmm.
to others? Well,
Right.
and I was trying to explain to my husband, of course, who's never been a witness, how like the theocratic ministry school worked and why it was so horrible as a kid. I don't, I can't say especially for sisters because I don't know what it was like as a little brother. But I was explaining
I'm
to him
sure
and
your younger husband.
I said, if you were like an 8 or 9 year old boy, you just got up on the stage, read your 10 verses from the Bible, and like went back to your seat. That
Hmm.
was pretty much it. I said, when I
Right.
was 8 or 9 years old, you're assigned a theme and a setting, which might be, talking to a neighbor or talking to a worldly relative or whatever. I said, you're expected to write out a 5-minute skit full of dialogue between you and another person, based around this theme. You're expected to incorporate all these, scriptures that prove your point or validate your position on whatever subject. And I said you have to get all that including like the greeting, the conclusion, everything in 5 minutes. And of course, he was perplexed. He said, "Why would they make a kid do all that?" It's just the way it is. And he said, "Well, what happens if you
Well,
can't
because
fit it all
women
in
can't be
10?"
teaching. I'm
What?
sorry, women can't be teaching from the platform. They have to teach another woman opposite of
Right.
them.
Yeah.
So you
So it was
can't.
a skit.
Women
It
can't be.
wasn't
So you
like
got to
he
set up
was
this
even.
whole little thing where you're teaching another woman.
He said, "What happens if you can't fit it in 5 minutes?" And I said, "Well, you get like a 10-second grace period. And then at the 5 minute, 10-second mark, at least in our congregation, the overseer would reach down and ding a bell. He had a bell, kind of like the one you would see at like a hotel check-in desk at his chair.
Mhm.
And he would get the
Just
bell, ding.
echo through the.
Oh, and it would just echo through the hall. And it was
Yeah.
just every person, but especially every kid's like worst nightmare to get the bell rung. Oh man.
Oh,
So
I get the feeling.
cringy if you're a kid.
Oh, awful. And it just meant that you're already not getting a G or a good on that one, because you
Get
went
the
over the time.
W, which is not for win. I'm sorry. It means for work
Just
on
for
this.
yes.
Need work.
I remember the silly situation because they're always trying to come up with a fresh one because you again have the two women that were, and I appreciate the irony of a man speaking over you to explain how the sister talk worked, where they weren't allowed to explain things to men. Anyway, so sorry about that. But I it, the absurdity of having to force these two adult women and sometimes it's children, but two female JW sisters sitting up there, and they'd have to come up with a new reason for why, or like, or it's just it would be the strangest things, these settings that they'd have to come up with. And I remember one of my favorite ones was Rebecca, my wife at the time. She was with this older sister, and the older sister was it was her talk, and Rebecca was the assistant. And the older sister started the talk in a way I'll never forget. She said, "Well, Rebecca, I wanted to know if maybe you and the gals and I could go for a luncheon, and that way maybe you could tell me about some of the new styles the younger sisters are wearing. I want to be more hip." First of all, it was adorable because she was like 75, 80 years old.
Oh,
And she just was like trying her best. And we're like, oh. And I'm not being condescending to people who are older, but she was just, this particular woman was just trying her darndest. But you had to come up with something fresh. And I felt so bad for that. Whereas me as an 8-year-old boy could talk to the congregation. I just go up there and start firing away. And that's
yeah.
just fine.
Just do your thing. Lucky.
I do remember going up to my first number two talk, and this is back when a number two talk meant that you had to do a little intro. Let's see what we learned from Solomon today. And then you read the 12 verses roughly, and then you do a little outro. And that's what we learned from Solomon. I looked out in the audience, and you were out there just smiling at me, like, ha ha, Jason has to give a talk, and I don't have to. And I just remember that burned me. Man, and then I never got a chance to get you back because you're never looking out at the audience when you started giving
That's
your
right.
first talk a couple years later.
That was the one saving grace of being a sister is that you didn't have to look out like to the masses. You'd only had to look at your
Mhm.
partner.
Man,
And that
mhm,
definitely helped.
that would have been nice.
And then number one, the last one on our list is
Okay, I'm sure you noticed that the feed has frozen here, and I don't know what happened, but what Falon was saying, and I could hear her, but for some reason the final recording didn't get it. That the most stressful thing for an introvert was going out in service, door to door preaching. Absolutely awful. And in her case, she ran into a kid from her class, and so that was obviously come Monday morning really awkward. So anyway, moving on.
pros, and it just took every shred of force within myself to get my little presentation out. And then, of course, when I saw
Mhm.
that kid at school, it was just awful.
Yikes.
It's awful in every way. I already was the weird kid at school, and now that kid knew that I was also the weird kid out in the real world.
Hey guys, Fallon came around to my house over the weekend. I don't
Oh,
know, maybe
yeah.
she's in love with me. Oh my gosh, that's embarrassing. Well, I'm not trying at one-upmanship here, but I think you may remember this. I not because we had the same teacher at different points, I think.
We did.
Mrs. Gravely. Yeah, you know where I'm going. I knocked on a door and she was paint a picture for you here. She was one of those teachers that just cracked the window a little bit and smoked in the classroom
Yep.
and sounded like she smoked in the classroom. She was like Mrs. Krabappel from The Simpsons, but without all the fun. She was absolutely awful. She was yelling at kids. She was just a very difficult person. And I knocked and with my dad at the door, and she opened the door, and she was so saccharine and fake sweet to me
Oh yeah.
and my dad bought the whole thing. And my dad, and she took the magazines, and then the next Monday, she's like, "Oh, Hanson came to my house." And then you're the kid who came to the teacher's house on the weekend. Oh, you must love the teacher.
Teacher's pet.
And teacher's pet, even though she's just absolutely, just burning me hard for it in front of the class. And then after my dad said, "Okay, well, you got to return a visit. Okay, we got to call back." So then the next week, and I've got to think about, I got to go back and see her. And then after 2 or 3 visits, she finally said, "Well, this isn't really for me." And, it was a little more direct with realizing that my dad was going to make this keep happening for both of us every weekend. She finally, showed some mercy and indicated to my dad that she wasn't interested.
Put
But
you out of your
that was always,
misery.
oh yeah, that was just always the worst. And that was back when, I didn't get, disciplined for it, but this was back in school in the 80s where they were still spanking kids
Oh
and
yeah.
teachers were smoking on the property. And it was just, oh yeah, I don't know. I think we grew up in a Stephen King novel. It's ridiculous.
100%.
Um, but it does, all this stuff that they make us do, like go to door, comment, make surface friends. It, to me, as I was just driving down the road the other day, it struck me as very similar to being with an abusive partner, a spouse who just is like, well, I like to do this on the weekends, so that's what we're going to do. And you don't get any say. You just get forced to go do the thing that you hate, and that everything about you, your personality says, I shouldn't be doing this. And then your partner's, your spouse's answer back is, well, I don't like your personality. You need to put on a new personality. Yours isn't good enough. And there's this constant undermining of I'll say me as a person, as a child, and then into teen years, and there's always this. There's something deeply wrong. There's many things wrong with you,
Yeah.
and nothing about you is acceptable, and you need to be a completely different person to be acceptable to God and to the congregation and to your family and to earn the love that you have. It is absolutely an abusive role that the organization has taken on there.
Yeah. I like that. I like that analogy. And there are things maybe you did like participating in. Maybe you do like public speaking. Maybe you do
Mhm.
enjoy, knocking on a stranger's door. More power to you. But even if it's something that you enjoy, when you're number one, forced to do it or, pressured into doing it all the time. And then
Right.
number two, you're chastised if you don't want to do it or made to feel like something's wrong with you, you're going to get sick of doing it real quick, even if it was initially something that you enjoyed. I will never forget one time I was in service. I was living in Middle Tennessee, and it was
Yeah.
4 sisters in the car group. And the driver of the car group was one of the elders' wives. And there was another sister in the car group who was a little older, and she was just she just had a very blunt personality. She was very matter of fact about everything, not really afraid to speak her mind. And I love that about her.
I like her already.
But the elder's wife was talking about ministry and how it was just, so fulfilling. And oh, doesn't it just recharge your battery and, like just make you feel so wonderful? And in my mind, of course, I was thinking, not really. I'm hot. I'm tired. I worked all week. Like, no one wants these magazines. No one wants to talk to me. I don't feel that way. But of course, I would never dare breathe a word of that. And this
No.
older sister, out of nowhere, she just chimed in. She said, I hate it. Crickets, dead silence.
Wow.
And the elder's wife kind of gave the nervous laugh and she said, hate it? And the sister said, I hate it. She said, I hate talking to strangers. I hate trying to like convince someone of something that they're not interested in. I hate approaching a stranger's door. I hate going on stranger's property. Like I hate all of it. And we didn't even know what to say. And she said, I do it because number one, I feel like it pleases the Lord. But then number two, that's the rules. I don't have a choice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a say in the matter. So I just do it. She
Mm-hmm.
said, but if you're asking my opinion, I hate it. And I didn't say anything, but inside I was like, oh yeah, tell her. I was cheering her on from the inside.
That's amazing. I wonder if Chaka were here, we could ask him because he's a mental health professional. What is it about her? Was she just something internally that even though she adhered to the standards, she didn't let that, because there's this group thing that we all get. I certainly did, where you didn't want to say anything because you're afraid the other person, is going to judge you for
Fear of
that. And
judgment.
then everybody hates going out in service, but then you have, a congregation of 100 people saying, well, there's 101 and you only have one that's saying what's actually on her mind. But
Right.
they're all saying, going out in the ministry gives me so much joy. And that was a good impression of someone who says that.
Yes.
But they sound like a Stepford wife or something. And there's just this group thinking that takes over, and everybody internally is thinking, I hate it, but I'm the only one, so I got to go along with it.
Right. Something's wrong with me. That's a me problem.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of times I also feel like the organization acts like the poison is also the cure. So I've heard them say things like, if you find that the ministry is a drudgery, maybe you're not doing it enough. Why don't you try auxiliary pioneering? Or, if you're a shy person, like I said before, why don't you try sitting somewhere different? But exposure therapy is not the solution for everything. You know what I mean? That's just not, it's not a one size fits all cure.
Yeah. I don't, obviously one shouldn't run away from one's fears, all the time, because that's not going to help anything. But I don't think that necessarily a fear of flying, the answer is to get on a Cessna and go skydiving.
Right.
That doesn't track. That's just going to just freak you out and traumatize you. And as much as I actually did not mind public speaking, I am introverted, but for some reason, when there's a large group, I can handle that just fine. It does not bother me. The nerves fall away and I'm fine. But when I'm in the door-to-door preaching, I did it so much. I pioneered for 7 or 8 years.
Yeah.
I did it so much when I wasn't pioneering, and it never got more pleasant or easier to do.
Same.
Even when I was fully indoctrinated, wholly in, and just, I knew I'm saving lives, I was still like, oh my God, there's got to be a better way.
And you
Couldn't these
almost feel
rocks
like
cry out for us?
you almost feel like the more you hate it, that it's a validation that it's right. Like,
Right.
This must just be the devil. Like, this is Satan persecuting me. He's giving me all these like feelings of, discomfort approaching strangers. That must
Mhm.
mean that I'm on the right track.
Yeah.
So we say all this. We comprise this list just to say, if you are someone that has a naturally more conservative social personality, if you are easily overwhelmed by crowds or sounds or, massive gatherings of thousands of people, it is overstimulating to you, or maybe you don't want to talk into a microphone. There's nothing wrong with you. God gives you those instincts for a reason. Maybe that's just not for you. It doesn't mean that you lack faith. It doesn't mean that you're a bad Christian. So don't punish yourself, or don't let anyone feel that you should punish yourself if that's just your natural disposition.
Right. And I think my version of that would be, if you feel uncomfortable meeting new people, it might be that several 100,000 years of evolution have taken place. Maybe that's just something that humans have developed, and that's okay. And perhaps it'll serve you in not, going to doors and getting, guns pointed at you and dogs sicked on you and other things like that. It's okay to not want to do those things. And now I'm just coming off preachy because it's okay not to want to do those things. Okay, swipe that again. Let me try it one more time. Yeah, I completely support this idea because the organization just teaches you that it's not okay to not want to do those things.
Yeah.
And I my goodness, the best thing, one of the best things I've ever experienced is, and the one of the things I'm actually grateful that I was one of Jehovah's Witnesses for, is that now, even now, the weekends seem lovely. They're just glorious. And when it's midweek meeting time and I'm not going, it's amazing. I can go recharge. I can do something nice. I can spend an evening with friends. I can just stay in and recharge myself if I want to. I don't have to. It's just made every other aspect of my life, I guess, so much better not doing those things.
Yeah, you can recharge your battery in the way that works for you as an
Mhm.
individual
Yeah, well put.
rather than just the hive mindset.
Future is bright. We're taking flight from shadows to sunlight. Everything's alright. Turn the page now. New day's begun. All that we dream, we have won. In the mirror's gaze, see strength and grace.